All that practice worked. A very good morning to all of you, and welcome to Nobel Prize Dialogue India 2025. I'm Shilpi Ghosh from Tata Trusts.
And I'm Owen Gaffney from Nobel Prize Outreach in Stockholm, and it is our privilege to be your hosts for this dialogue. We will be your guides for the next 2.5 hours for what promises to be a day rich in ideas, inspiration, and lots of hope and energy. So as we work towards the future we want.
Yes. In fact, we believe this dialogue is co-created. And we say that because when we asked all of you in your registration form how optimistic you are about the future, we got a whopping 1,000 responses, which says that India is amongst the most optimistic countries in the world. So cheers to that.
Yeah, so...
Owen, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so if we look at the data from the survey, so we had 1,000 people, and about 70% of you about 80% of you, in fact, are very optimistic about your own future, 70% about the future of India, and about 60% about the future of the world. And I did a survey last year, a global survey on attitudes and on optimism. And in fact, as Shilpi says, that India turns out to be way more optimistic than many other countries, one of the most optimistic in the world. And I think you're in very, very good company, because my experience with working with the Nobel Prize is that many Nobel laureates are very, very optimistic people, have a very, very optimistic outlook on life. And that may give some indication as to how we achieve human progress and great ideas. One of the examples here is Saul Perlmutter, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011 for his work on how not only is the universe expanding, but it's expanding at an accelerating rate. And he says there's something within the scientific community which is almost like he calls scientific optimism in the world, about how it's almost like levels of irrationality, because so many people are telling you over and over again, just give up. You know, this will never work. This, including your funders, and you keep on going and you keep on going, and you achieve things. But my second example is with the economics laureate Daniel Kahneman, who's a famously optimistic person. And he said he was optimistic because optimists are happier than pessimists. So the pessimists here should think about that. And he also said something else that was really interesting. And that was that, to paraphrase a little bit, that the future is created by optimists. The future is created by people who believe in human progress in all sorts of areas, not just in science, but also when it comes to culture, when it comes to democracy, when it comes to women's rights, and these things, that in some ways progress is driven by that optimism that we can have a better world.
Yes, and it's this human progress that we're here to talk about today. And you'll have insights from Nobel laureates and global thinkers of renown. But before that, let's invoke blessings. Let's invoke some positive energy through the lighting of the lamp. May I invite on stage Mr. Siddharth Sharma, CEO, Tata Trusts, our Nobel laureates, James Robinson and David MacMillan, and Executive Director of the Nobel Foundation, Hannah Hwana. I got that right.
Thank you very much. And the Nobel Prize is unique amongst international prizes, and it not just represents sciences and economics, but also culture, peace, and the arts. And we always like to include cultural components in our programs.
Yes. So today we want to begin with something that we believe will be truly magical. A performance by legends of Indian music, Padma Shri Kavita Krishnamurti ji and Padma Vibhushan Shri L. Subramaniam ji. May we invite you on stage, please. Yes. Their music has enthralled audiences across the world and across genres and generations, and we're totally privileged to have them here with us today. They're going to be joined by a set of brilliant hands on various instruments, and I'm going to welcome all of them here. There's Frijo Francis and Atul Raninga on the keyboard. There's Keith Peters on the bass. There's DSR Murthy on the mridangam, N. Radhakrishnan on the ghatam, Satya Sai on morsing, and Karthik Mani on the octopads. Kavita ji, Dr. Subramanian Tolian, an honor to have you here. Please, the stage is yours.
Namaste and good morning. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here for this very special occasion. The opening song was by the very famous, one of the most famous, important composers, Purandaradasa from Karnataka. He is believed to be, we have him as the father of Carnatic music. The first opening song was in praise of Lakshmi. It's a very popular song. Next, I'll do a composition called Indian Express. This has got nothing to do with the newspaper. It's a composition which I wrote about India progressing very fast. It was written many years back. Now the dream is coming true. So I'm playing that composition, Indian Express. Thanks a lot. Thank you, sir. I'd like to introduce my colleagues, fantastic musicians. Free Joe on keyboard. Atul, fantastic arranger, composer from Bombay. Keith Peters. He went to Canada, he has come back here. Top bass player from Chennai. Mr. DSR Murthy, fabulous mridangam player. Radha Krishnan on Gattam. Sri Satisai on Morsing. And Karthik Mani on percussion. We'll do the final piece, Ganga. It's also one of the earlier recordings we have done. Composition called Ganga. Thank you.
सुरेश्वरी भगवती गंगे त्रिभुवन तारिणी तरणी तरंगे शंकर
Thank you so much. That was absolutely astounding, absolutely incredible. virtuosic performance, absolutely
Yeah,
mind-blowing,
I'm lost
actually.
for words.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming to have experienced what we just did, and wouldn't you all agree?
Yeah. I only wish every Monday morning lecture in chemistry and economics would start like this.
Exactly.
Absolutely incredible.
So we wanted to just have a small interaction with the both of you because we have the honor and the pleasure of having the two of you here, and we don't want to miss that opportunity. So, Dr. Subramaniam, for you, we understand you're a medical doctor, and then you're a PhD in music, and you're now a D.Lit as well in music. There is an intersection of music and science that you're seeing here. There's a connection. How do we decode this?
Basically, my father was one of the greatest musical teachers and musicians.
Wow.
His dream was to make the Indian violin globally known as a solo instrument. So he worked a lot and developed a lot of techniques. So from a very young age, he taught all of us. And I wanted to be like him, play music. But you know, those days, music profession, everybody doubted. Normally they thought, you know, you become an engineer, doctor, or lawyer at the end. If nothing is okay, then go to the musician. That was the kind of attitude. But I believe, you know, one of my friends told if they are not good in anything, they'll definitely not be good in music also. So I wanted to be like my father. So I pursued music, but I had my education, became a doctor. Then my parents were very kind. My father said, do whatever you want. I did my master's in composition in US. Then pursued my music.
Yeah, but we've also heard that you believe every child should have some orientation in music. And tell us why you think that.
I think music is very important for mental, physical, and emotional growth of every child. Because nowadays we see so much of stress, so much of, you know, many college students committing suicide and things like that, a lot of pressure. And also the part of the brain which works for science, maths, and everything is different than the other part of the brain, which is normally important for the arts and creativity and everything. What do we learn in music? Basically, there are 5-6 notes in our system where we are supposed to play for 1 hour, taking that 5 notes. How can make it happen for 1 hour or 45 minutes, taking only 5 notes? It's by the permutation combination, which is mathematics, and which is emotional, and also the different dynamics in the combination of notes. So basically taking 5-6 notes and try to, we can't repeat the same phrases again and again, then automatically the interest will be lost among the audience. So we try to take combination of notes and create different embellishment, different emotion, different dynamics, so it becomes most interesting. So it is a spontaneous creativity. So that can be applied to anything. I think even Einstein was playing the violin whenever he wanted to, whenever he had the time. And many musicians were very fond of music. I remember one of our Nobel laureates, Chandrasekhar Subramaniam. He was very fond of music. I had the pleasure of performing for him also. And so a lot of people, music has kept them going and growing and intellectually developing. So for the children, it's very, very important.
And Kavita, have you thoughts on this link between science and the arts and music?
Well, I wouldn't be able to connect science and arts so much because I was hopeless at science and very hopeless in maths. Even when they do sit and do very, very high funda calculations on the mridangam and, you know, they do 13.5 beats and 17.5 beats in a composition, I really have to go more on instinct than learning. But the fact remains that I do feel that, like when I grew up in school, naturally I had physics, chemistry, maths, and I had to pass it. And I also did my music, but I feel the opportunity to music should come to every child, because it's, in school days, sometimes you don't know which part of you is alive after you finish and what you really want to do. So all these opportunities to either play instrument or to do a vocal and your studies, you do everything, I think the growth becomes very, very fulfilled. And like in my case, I'm a totally flop as an economist, though I did economics in college. My graduation was in BA honors. I'm really ashamed to say that. But the fact remains that the moment I finished my graduation, my music took on. Because in college, I was heard by a few people singing songs, and then I got the opportunity to be on a big stage and sing jingles. I sang Washing Powder, Nirma, and stuff like that. And then I got into music. Therefore, I feel that if I had just done school studies and I hadn't got the opportunity to do music, then I would have never discovered that I can sing a little bit.
That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Well, thank you.
And yes. And so we've just not had the opportunity of listening to your music, but also your amazing views. And that needs to be felicitated. So may I request CEO Tata Trusts, Mr. Siddharth Sharma, to felicitate the guests that we have here. This is a small token of our appreciation for everything that you've done for us today.
And again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being part of this event.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you so much. And now it's time to officially open the dialogue with our first address. May I request back on stage Mr. Siddharth Sharma, CEO Tata Trusts, to tell us why this moment matters, not just to the country, not just to India, not just to Tata Trusts, but for all of us here to whom dialogue, deliberations, and discussions make a difference to the future that we want. Mr. Siddharth Sharma.
Are we having the mics on?
Yeah.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege and joy for me to welcome all of you to the Nobel Prize Dialogue India 2025 in exclusive partnership with the Tata Trusts. To do so here at the Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru, an institution born out of Jamsetji Tata's vision over a century ago, feels deeply humbling, inspiring, and symbolic. This is stemmed, the incubation of this institution is stemmed from a simple yet radical dream that India's greatest wealth would not lie just in its natural resources, but in the power of its people and their capacity to learn and to dream. From that dream grew an important part of the Tata Trust's 133-year legacy of building and nurturing centers of excellence across science and arts. Each represents a promise, a conviction that knowledge, when directed towards progress, forms the foundation for nation building. This vision of progress measured not just in metrics, but in humans flourishing, continues to guide the work of the Tata Trusts till date. This belief also echoes in our partnership with the Nobel Prize Outreach, an alliance forged between Indian philanthropy and the world's foremost institution celebrating the pursuit of knowledge. Together, we stand for something profound, a belief that ideas must travel borders, knowledge must be harnessed to serve humanity, and the young must be empowered not just to inherit the world, but to shape and lead it. It only feels fitting that we meet here in the city of innovation to ask, what is the future we want and how we might build it? Now, the thing about the future is that it is never static. It's always dynamic, it's always evolving, and it builds on the work that has been done in the past. And for me personally, and I think a lot of us who are gathered here today, India's tryst with the future began on 15th August 1947, when we freed ourselves from colonial rule. And in one of the most soul-stirring speeches, I think, that has ever been made by India's first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and I quote from that speech, delivered to Indian Parliament and the Constituent Assembly at the stroke of the midnight hour. Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the pledge of dedication to the service of India and her people and to the still larger cause of humanity. And then he went on to say, the future is not one of ease or resting, but of incessant striving so that we may fulfill the pledges we have so often taken and the one we shall take today. The service of India means the service of the millions who suffer. It means the ending of poverty and ignorance and disease and inequality of opportunity. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation, and he was referring to the father of the nation, has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but as long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. And I think that is the North Star which every Indian works on. That is the North Star on which every institution strives to deliver. And then in 1991 was a second awakening, the second epochal moment when two people got together by sheer providence, the late Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and the late Finance Minister and then the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh Ji, to script India's growth story, the growth trajectory. We were always known as a nation with a Hindu rate of growth, 3 to 3.5% per annum. And we then moved into a high growth orbit of rates of growth consistently averaging 8% per annum, and which lifted us and millions of Indians out of poverty. And I'm very glad to say here that in this audience, we today have a person who was part of that dream team which led India, unshackled India, and that's Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Please give him a big hand. And then we have our current Prime Minister, Honorable Shri Narendra Modi Ji, who's given us the goalpost of Viksit Bharat 2047, who has very eloquently said, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Prayas, Sabka Saath. And I think that is the goalpost that drives Indians now towards achieving the next scale of economic and social empowerment. We are today well on our way to being the third largest economy in the world. We are already the fifth largest. But that's not where we end. The future envisages justice, as our Constitution said, social, economic, and political. And we need to make sure that we deliver. And we also envisage a future where young people are encouraged to question, imagine, and build. Our role as institutions, philanthropists, scientists, and economists is to ensure that they get the tools, the opportunities, and the freedom to do this, and they are not left solving puzzles in the dark. That is why we at the Tata Trusts continue to strengthen India's knowledge infrastructure, from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research to the National Center for the Performing Arts, to HERE itself, one of R&T's dreams and visions in his last days, the Tata Institute of Genetics and Society. With these, we aim to build ecosystems that nurture inquiry, encourage creativity, and spark innovation, reaching those who need it most, not by chance, but by design. The late R&T, through his belief in sustainable community-led development, laid the foundations for a commitment to lasting transformative impact. Our greatest tribute to him and to our founding fathers is to achieve this by positively impacting the lives of millions of underserved Indians. And in the same spirit and with the same humility and with the same conviction, we convene this dialogue between Nobel Prize laureates, world experts, teachers and students to spark meaningful ideas and exchanges between disciplines, cultures and generations. And to remind young people that there is space for science and compassion to exist as there is space for ambition alongside empathy. These are the twin lights that can guide humanity forward towards solutions pairing innovation with inclusion, aiming to serve humanity beyond one's own lifetime. Together, let us enter this dialogue with curiosity and hope, and how we can continue opening doors for our young people. Because the future we want is not waiting for us in the distance. It is being built in rooms like this, in classrooms, in laboratories, in studios, and in the dreams of every young person hoping to change the world. Thank you and welcome once again to this dialogue.
Stage. I'd like to invite onto stage the Executive Director of the Nobel Foundation, Hannah Huerna.
So, Your Excellencies, Nobel Prize laureates, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, welcome to this Nobel Prize Dialogue. I want to start by thanking Tata Trust and Siddhartha Sharma for hosting this event together with us at Nobel. This is a unique collaboration that we highly value. And I'd also like to thank the Nobel Prize laureates joining us today. We have chemistry laureate David MacMillan and economic sciences laureate James Robinson up here in the front. Just a few weeks ago, the new Nobel Prize laureates were presented, this year's Nobel Prize laureates. It was one prize a day, altogether 6 days, with new Nobel Prizes in 6 fields. We had physiology or medicine, physics, chemistry, literature, peace, and economic sciences. And these new laureates, all over the world, they received this very special call from Stockholm or Oslo, telling them that they were about to be awarded the Nobel Prize. Surprised and humbled, and I think that each laureate has their own story, its own very special memory of this call, this telephone call, of that historic moment when they get the news that they're about to receive the prize. Some laureates this year were interrupted at lectures or in meetings. One laureate answered this call when he was changing planes at an airport in Germany. And another laureate was out hiking in the US mountains and got the news several hours later when his telephone was accidentally connected again. Very surprised. James Robinson, that we will listen to today, he was awakened by his wife. And David MacMillan thought it was a prank when he got the call and actually went back to sleep. The vision of Alfred Nobel, the scientist and inventor that created the Nobel Prize, was to recognize progress and in particular achievements that confer the greatest benefit to humankind. And in his will, Alfred Nobel stated that the prize should be awarded to the worthiest person in the world. And this has led to a remarkable legacy. For almost 125 years, the Nobel Prize has highlighted the importance of science, literature, and peace from the discoveries of antibiotics and the structure of DNA to recognizing achievements of Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. And of course, this includes many Indian Nobel Prize laureates, as Rabindranath Tagore in literature and C.V. Raman in physics, and the economists Amartya Sen and Abhijit Banerjee. And we have chosen today the theme, The Future We Want, for this dialogue to signal that our future is not written yet. It's written by us every day. And as we begin this dialogue, we shall remember that knowledge, courage, and compassion drive human progress. And it's my sincere hope that these conversations today will inspire you to learn more, to seek even more knowledge, and to be an active participant in shaping the future we want. And this Nobel Prize Dialogue is organized by Nobel Prize Outreach and by Tata Trusts with the support of Nobel International Partners, ABB, EQT, Scania, and Stegra. And I'd also like to give a special thanks to the Consulate General of Sweden in Mumbai and Embassy of Sweden in New Delhi. So welcome all to this Nobel Prize Dialogue. I look so much forward to the discussions today and to learn more together with you. Welcome.
Thank you, Hannah Huena. And now we will start the first session, and our first speaker is James Robinson. So James was awarded the 2024 Economics Prize for studies of how institutions are formed and affect prosperity. And in fact, it was James's work that really inspired this theme, The Future We Want, because we could look at it through the lens of institutions. What kind of institutions create progress? James is an economist and political scientist. He is originally from the UK, but has built his academic career in the US. But he has built research projects in Bolivia, in Cameroon, in Chile, Colombia, Haiti, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Zimbabwe. And he is a fellow at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Nigeria. He has published 3 books co-authored with Daron Acemoglu. Most famously, the book Why Nations Fail. Luckily for us, the book also looked at why nations succeed. James, the floor is yours.
Okay, terrific, wonderful. I'm going to stand here. No one told me where to stand, but this looks appropriate. Yes. Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm going to talk about prosperity and progress and whether or not we're at a sort of inflection point. You'll see what I mean by that when I get into the discussion. So, when I think about prosperity and progress and my own academic discipline of economics and when did theorizing about prosperity and progress start, you could cut into that in many points in world history, but one way to do it would be with these 2 Scottish gentlemen. On the right, the more famous of the 2, Adam Smith, and on the left, the less famous but also very important figure of the Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Ferguson. So Ferguson and Smith, they were in Scotland in the second half of the 18th century. They were looking at all the tectonic things that were going on in their societies, urbanization, industrialization, a radical transformation, and they came up with a theory of it. And the theory of it, I'm going to call the one-way street theory, is sort of the more you are like us, the better. Okay? We're successful, we're industrializing, we're generating prosperity and progress. So just be like us. Be like Scottish institutions, Scottish values, Scottish, etc. So this I'm going to call the one-way street model of prosperity and progress. Be like Kirkcaldy in Scotland. Okay. Now, that sounds a bit sort of ridiculous at some level, but actually that view of the world had a fundamental impact on social theory. In fact, if you look at the history of social theory from that point on, it elaborates, it modulates, it picks up on the one-way theory. Henry Sumner Maine, I put the copy of his book here, Village Communities in East and West, who was one of the inventors of modern anthropology, kind of the sociology of law. He worked in India for the British government trying to formalize and codify Indian law, and he did this comparative project of Western and Eastern law. He came up with this concept of from status to as you walked along the street, this one-way street, as you moved towards Scotland, you went from status to contract. Marx and Engels reformulated it. They said you went from feudalism to capitalism to socialism. Always a kind of linear thing, things getting better. Contract better than status, socialism better than capitalism, better than feudalism. This one-way street, of course, got enshrined in development economics. Development economics is all about how you get people from wherever you are in the developing world towards the values and institutions of Scotland, of the Western world. I put this figure here from Arthur Lewis's, one of the founders of development economics, from his famous paper in 1954 on the dual economy, not because I'm going to explain it, but just to show you how much better the graphics are in academic journals than they were in the 1950s. And I want to emphasize that this is not just about economics. Economists might talk about economic institutions, but there's a package here. There's a liberal package of values and ideas, freedom, liberty. Adam Smith also, he wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, but he wrote another one about the theory of moral sentiments. So this isn't just about economics or markets. It's a much broader thing about how to organize societies and what sort of values you should have. And here's a famous photograph from the late 1960s in San Francisco of a lady expressing her notion of freedom and individuality by throwing her brassiere away. Okay, so I want to emphasize this sort of much more encompassing package of liberal principles. Now you could say, well, show me the money. What are the fruits of that? Well, according to economists, here are the fruits of this model of liberal society and individualism. It's the rise of liberal society economically. Here's just a standard measure of prosperity, income per capita. This is, a picture of what my colleague at the University of Chicago, Kenneth Pomerantz, called the Great Divergence. Okay, the Great Divergence. Down at the bottom, you have sub-Saharan African societies who've remained poor over this period. You could say, illiberal. At the top, you have the United States or Western Europe that have flourished economically. But, why did I say there's an inflection point? Well, I think it's pretty clear, at least from my office window, that this model is in a great deal of crisis at the moment. This is the Credit Suisse kind of wealth pyramid. Everyone knows about the incredibly high levels of inequality in the world. According to Credit Suisse's calculations, it's very similar to the World Inequality Lab of Thomas Piketty in Paris. If you look at just people who have over $1 million worth of wealth, that's about 1.6% of the world population. 1.6% of the world population own basically 50% of the entire wealth in the world. So income and wealth concentration just seems to be monotonically increasing at the moment. So this is leading to a kind of economic crisis. This isn't supposed to be what happens in a society where everybody's equal, everybody has the same rights, everybody has the same opportunities. How can that possibly be consistent with this enormous concentration of wealth? And it's not just an economic crisis or an economic inconsistency. Even in the United States, I could talk about many other parts of the world, but even in the United States, you could say the country that has succeeded most in this model, there's an enormous cultural an ideological crisis of the model. Just to give you some facets of that here, an ethnography of President Trump's voters in the US South by Arlie Hochschild, who's a sociologist at University of California at Berkeley, strangers in their own land. They're so alienated from contemporary US society that they're strangers in their own land. The beautiful cartoon from 1976 from Saul Steinberg, The View of the World from 9th Avenue. Okay, I think this is the most graphic, most visceral way of talking about the polarization in the United States. Here you see Manhattan at the bottom, and then there's what's known as the flyover country. Okay, there's this part of the United States that you don't really care about, no one cares about, you just fly over it to go to the other coast. Okay, so there's this enormous cultural, regional, economic polarization emerged, and on the right, you know, God and man at Yale. You know, if you want to know why there's so much antagonism towards liberal educational institutions in the United States at the moment, go and read this book. It's not a new book, 1951, William F. Buckley. He was a student at Yale. He wrote a book about what a horrible and unrepresentative place Yale University was. So there's an enormous backlash, not just about the economics, but about the culture and the ideology of this liberal society. Meanwhile, for the first time in history, you could say, there's a very successful illiberal model. So on the left, this is Shanghai. This is just the transformation of Shanghai between 1987 and 2017. Just you see this thing emerged out of nothing. Okay, so there's an alternative model of illiberal success. So when I say it's an inflection point, you know, I always think the best language to talk about this is Marx and Engels. You know, at the time of the 1848 revolution, when Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, they have this beautiful phrase, all that is solid melts into air. All that is holy is profaned. I think a lot of the discussion at the moment, you know, of world politics, geopolitics, the economy, it's sort of similar to that, no? Like everything you thought was for sure is kind of melting. And everything you thought was holy is profaned, okay? So what comes out of that? Well, you know, Western society, in the world I grew up, in England, you know, we were taught about the one-way street, and the one-way street starts with the Greeks, of course. Now, I put these two images up here for a particular reason. On the left-hand side is a famous frieze of the Battle of Marathon between the Greeks and the Persians. On the right-hand side, as every English schoolboy knows, is the Battle of Hastings, where the Anglo-Saxons were defeated by the Normans. There's Harold Godwinson, the Anglo-Saxon king, with an arrow in his eye. Okay? Now, why compare the Battle of Marathon to the Battle of Hastings? Well, because John Stuart Mill, one of the founders of liberalism, famously said, in English history, the Battle of Marathon was much more important than the Battle of Hastings. Why? Because we start with the Greeks. Everything starts with the Greeks, you know. But you know what? If you read contemporary scholarship about the Greeks, it's actually a little bit different from what John Stuart Mill imagined. In fact, the Greeks had a kind of hybrid culture. You know, they borrowed the notion of a city-state, probably from the Levant or Syria. Democracy, also. They didn't invent democracy. They imported it. Their script, they borrowed from the Phoenicians. And even at the bottom, one of the great sort of stories of Greek history, Greek legend, the story of Achilles and Patroclus in the Iliad, has possibly borrowed from the great Sumerian myth of Gilgamesh. On the left is Gilgamesh and Enkidu killing the monster Humbaba. Some scholars, a bit out of my scope of academic learning, many scholars now make a comparison between these images. So even the Iliad, the kind of foundational work of Greek culture, had many elements borrowed from the Mediterranean, from the Middle East. So if you look at actually real existing cultures, they don't have this aspect of the one-way street. It's a two-way street, or it's a multi-way street. Everyone is borrowing and learning from each other and mingling and mixing and recreating. And, you know, that's true with liberalism too. When we tell the story of liberalism, you could tell the story of the collapse of absolute monarchy and the emergence of a different sort of society. Here's one of the leveler tracts that emerged during the English Civil War. But what we know now is that liberalism was fundamentally impacted by the discovery of the Americas, by the nature of American indigenous society, by the Iroquois Confederacy. If you wanted to see an effective democratic constitutional government in 17th century England, the place was not to look in England or Europe. The place was to look in the Americas and look at how American indigenous society was organized. So liberalism wasn't something that traced itself to the Greeks, and the Greeks weren't exactly what they're made out to be by John Stuart Mill. It was a two-way street, what I call a two-way street, a multiple-way street. Why am I emphasizing that? Because I think the moment of an inflection point, the moment of, what the anthropologist Victor Turner called a kind of liminal moment, where many things become imaginable and your ideas are disruptive. For me, as an academic who's studied the developing world for his whole life, that's a very exciting moment. Okay, I give you one image from West Africa, from a Kan society in southern Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, of what's called a Siamese crocodile. What's the Siamese crocodile? Well, you can see there's two heads of the crocodile. The two heads of the crocodile symbolize the individual, but the crocodiles have a stomach in common. Okay, so you're bound together by your society, by your family, by your community. The Siamese crocodile is an image of the harmony between the individual and the society and the community. And that's something which is not part of liberal thought. And it's something which we've lost, certainly, in the United States. So I offer this as an image of we all have a lot to learn from each other in a way that's not possible in this one-way street model, where people like me are supposed to be telling people like you how you should organize your societies. It's my experience doing research in the developing world in the past 30 or 40 years is it never works out like that. You're always learning more from other people than you're actually teaching them yourself. Okay? So I'm talking about liberal model as an invention. Okay? And I'm talking about, for me as an academic, as a scholar, who's always wanted to make the playing field more level, if you like, to make the street multi-way, two-way, multi-way, okay? What will we invent now? I think many people are worried that the current situation, the current crisis of liberal society is going to usher in a much more hierarchical model of society. I could have put chimpanzees and gorillas here, but chickens are cuter, no? I mean, so chickens, like gorillas and chimpanzees, have a dominance hierarchy, which is the pecking order. There's a dominance hierarchy of chickens. There's chickens high up the pecking order, and there's chickens low down the pecking order. So hierarchy, of course, has a deep evolutionary basis. Chimpanzees and gorillas, they're our closest primate ancestors. So we could have a new hierarchical society could emerge. But I don't think there's anything inevitable about that. Okay? Just as we invented liberalism, we could invent a new model. Liberalism has been challenged before, and it's reinvented itself in the late 19th century, in the 1930s, at the end of the Second World War. So there's lots of scope for reinvention too, and I think this emphasis on the future and what will the future bring, that's up to everybody in this room to determine. And I think egalitarianism also has deep evolutionary basis. I was very struck by this article in the New York Times very recently of an image projected onto a wall of a building in China. And it says, by a dissident, translating from the Chinese, "Rise up, you who refuse to be slaves. Freedom is no gift. Take it back. Overthrow the tyranny of the Communist Party." So communism, I guess you could say, that was a failed alternative to liberalism. But I just end with this to say, what comes next? That's an interesting thing that it'd be good to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James Robinson. And now our next speaker in this session is Tallulah Oni. Tallulah occupies many worlds that are all connected: Nigeria, South Africa, Great Britain. She is a clinical professor of global public health and sustainable development at the University of Cambridge. She is a founder and CEO of Urban Better and an honorary professor at the University of Cape Town. Her work crosses medicine and cities, academia and advocacy, the global north and the global south. So, Tallulah Oni, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Great. Unlike my esteemed, I was told where to stand, so I got a little bit on you there. Thank you for the kind introduction. It is an honor to be here to contribute to this dialogue and to come after Professor Robinson-Mayer. So the day started with Owen talking about progress being driven by optimism. I'm going to hopefully show you that it will be driven by hope. And I will make that distinction, firstly. Secondly, if progress is going to emerge from more inclusive institutions, learning from the past, as Professor Robinson shared, then I would argue that cities are where that will be the canvas of that experimentation. So I'll start with the end, right? So these are the three key takeaways I'd like you to come away with. The first is that future-ready cities will recognize that urban infrastructure and health infrastructure are one and the same. The second is that future-ready cities will be equipped to take synergistic action on those converging risks. And the third is that future-ready cities will cultivate hope as the catalyst for urban transformation. And I'll delve into that. So let's get going. Urban infrastructure and health infrastructure. I'm trained as a physician. I'm a doctor, and I'm trained to heal. But actually, the vast majority of factors that influence our health lie outside of the healthcare sector. They lie in the environments where we live, where we work, where we play, where we connect. They lie in our transport systems, our education systems, our energy infrastructure, our built environments, our food environments. So when we actually talk about creating health, of course, healthcare is absolutely critical. But let's be sure that the 80% of factors that are shaping population health are actually being designed to optimize health and not delete it. Because health doesn't trickle down from good intentions. And by that I mean, there is an inherent belief that we'll just do any of these well and health will follow. But actually, if you don't center and think about how the built environment can optimize health, just doing it well does not necessarily create health. This is what I mean by cities. So in medicine, you're taught that the body is a complex adaptive system, which simply means all the different parts are connected. Nothing is in isolation. Now, I might not practice medicine in an individual human way, but I practice medicine in the urban level. So I say cities are my patients, right? And so I see cities as similar complex adaptive systems that can be harnessed for planetary health. And by planetary health, I simply mean the health of humans and the ecosystems that we depend on and the balance between those two. And what this spider diagram shows you is, on the right-hand side, you see the kinds of health outcomes that we are familiar with. The diseases, be that cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, cancers, emerging and existing infectious diseases. But what you can see is that healthcare access, if you move to the left, is but one of the determinants of those outcomes. And the physical activity environment, the air we breathe, the built environments that shape the ways we move, and our exposures to risks in those spaces. play a much more critical role in shaping population health and equity. Now, if you move further to the left, you see that those sectors that shape those are largely outside of the healthcare sector. But are we teaching our urban planners, are we teaching our transport engineers about how they can create health? Or are we just focusing on cultivating capabilities in the healthcare sector to treat disease that is preventable? So cities become this canvas to say, well, how can we create these systems for health that are optimized for both human development and thriving and the environment? The second point, right? So the first point was urban infrastructure and health infrastructure are one and the same. The second point is to highlight that in the same environment where we're seeing health play out, we are also seeing the climate risks that people are exposed to converging. And again, this is happening in cities. This is a Sankey diagram from a Lancet Pathfinders Commission on pathways to a healthy net zero that I was honored to be one of the commissioners on. And we looked at how to achieve health co-benefits through climate mitigation actions based on the existing evidence that exists. The key thing I want to point out to you are the three most critical pathways to achieve health co-benefits through climate mitigation actions, but was through action on air pollution. The second was by dietary shifts and the land use decisions that we make from that. So AFOLU is agriculture, forestry, and land use. And the third was active travel and public transport, so things that shape the ways that we move. And you can see how and why cities are so critical to all of that. There is another report that just came out a few weeks ago that looked at the synergies between the Sustainable Development Goals and climate action. And I'd really recommend you to have a look at this, because one of the things that we found was that, again, using the canvas of cities, interventions like electrifying a bus fleet, or by promoting active travel, or by urban green infrastructure, which, by the way, it's my first time in Bangalore and I really appreciate your trees. Those sorts of interventions that we see play out in cities, absolutely critical for health, a part of climate action, but are connected to multiple sustainable development goals. So we need to break away from the silos of, oh, who's doing SDG work, or who's doing climate work, or who's doing health work, and particularly in the context of rapid urbanization, where we and constrained resources, we cannot afford the business as usual of these siloed approaches. It just makes a lot more sense to work at the intersections where health and climate and urban hazards meet. I love this map because it shows just why business as usual is not an option. Those numbers represent the number of people moving into these cities per hour. So you can see that really the pace of urbanization and the futures that we're creating are being shaped now. So the question is, what would it take to shape them in ways that move us into the direction of that future? And that brings me to my final point, that future-ready cities will cultivate hope as a catalyst for transformation. And really importantly, that hope, so far this morning, I've heard the word hope 3 times. But that hope needs infrastructure, needs institutions to support and shape it. we know, and I'm told I'm sitting in the bedrock of innovation in the country, in the continent, in the region, globally even. But innovation is more than technology, and I think we know this. It is what happens when ideas, when people, when decision-making learn together and experiment together. But really importantly, and just to borrow from a comment that was made earlier by Mr. Sharma around young people entering into the dialogue in ways that shape the futures, and doing so with courage and hope. My central argument here is that in order to do that, we have to ensure that we have the infrastructures of hope and sustained institutions that sustain that hope in order to ensure that the vast majority of young people, and not just some, are able to contribute to that. But the challenge is that firstly, a lot of our institutions are poorly equipped to navigate that volatility, that liminal space that Professor Robinson mentioned earlier. Navigating that liminal space requires that we interrogate how the purpose of our institutions, and to think about how we create institutions for that liminal space, not in spite of. And how we create institutions that enable us to act with urgency, courage, and compassion, especially when we don't perceive these risks as urgent. So the challenge often with the urban risks that we encounter and the climate risks we encounter is that we don't see it as urgent, right? Your exposure to air pollution today does not necessarily result in the same way as infectious diseases, right? You're exposed to SARS-CoV-2 virus, 4 to 7 days later you get ill, right? You're exposed to a bacterial infection, a few days later you get ill. But you're exposed to extreme heat, you're exposed to air pollution, you're exposed to housing that doesn't have good thermal comfort. We tend to see the health impacts of that weeks later, months later, firstly. And secondly, we often don't even see it because it's externalized into the healthcare sector, right? So the urban planner does not see the rise in heart attacks or the rise in asthma cases. So we need institutions and infrastructure that help these things come together. And I will propose to you that we should be thinking about hope as critical urban infrastructure in the same way we think about roads, in the same way we think about schools. What do I mean by that? So there's a vast, by hope, by the way, Owen, I don't mean optimism, and I want to make the distinction because often hope is conflated with optimism and a sense of fingers crossed, let's hope it happens, right? But actually there's a vast school of philosophical and thought from philosophy and psychology that understands hope as a much more complex compound entity that comprises the desire for a particular outcome, right? And for that to happen, you have to have visualized it and imagined it. The belief in the possibility of that outcome, and critically, the agency to be part of shaping that outcome. And that agency requires the skills, it requires the will, it requires the pathways to move you towards that outcome. That is what I mean by hope in this context. So thinking about hope not as a sentiment, but as a method that can be cultivated, and as a mandate, in the same way we talk about sustainable institutions, and sustainability in terms of institutions. Have you heard anyone talk about hope as a virtue of an institution? with the infrastructure to shape that. What does that look like in practice? Because this sounds a little bit out there, right? This is what, I love the saying, because it speaks to, again, the comment by Mr. Sharma. I learned quite a bit around, the purpose of the country and the goal of economic growth as not being the end point, but the end point being justice, environmental, economic, social justice. And that requires, that's a transformation, that's a societal transformation. And this quote by Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire says, hope is a precondition for action. Without hope, there can be no sustained commitment to transformation. So, bear with me, this is my framework for hope infrastructure. That the infrastructure can be deconstructed into digital infrastructure, intellectual infrastructure, and social infrastructure. And that these infrastructures enable the conditions of emergence that shape the ways that we know, ways of knowing, ways of being, ways of doing, and ways of becoming. In terms of knowing, thinking about this as a knowledge, how can we ensure that we are creating knowledge that is actionable, that is co-produced? In terms of doing, how can we ensure that, be that advocacy or implementation, that is locally rooted, shaped by the people who stand, who bear the most consequence of the actions that are being taken and have the most to gain. Being in terms of future-oriented, so remember how my framing of hope, you cannot achieve an outcome that you haven't imagined. And so we have to ensure that we are investment in future-ready skills, and yes, technical, but we're also equipping with the futures-oriented mindsets, and that doesn't involve interrogating our internal mind maps. And lastly, becoming. Right, this is not an individual pursuit. How do we do that collectively? Learning lessons from different parts of the world, and the social infrastructure that allows that to happen. I'll end with this, because this is what it looks like a little bit in practice. We talk about the future, by the way. In order to understand the future, you also have to understand the present and the past. And this morning, the reason I know I arrived yesterday morning, but the reason I know about your trees is that I wanted to understand a little bit about the today of the cities before thinking about the tomorrow. And I went for a run, and I went for a run with this. It's an air quality monitor. I could monitor the particulate matter 2.5, right? Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to change my slide today, otherwise I would have shown you what it found, but actually really good, right? Particularly around the parks, at least very early this morning. I also went for a run with the Citizen Science app. It could capture, yes, the health and climate risks, but also the assets. And this is what it looks like a little bit with one of our initiatives, the Citizens Initiative, where we have in cities like Lagos, Bogota, Johannesburg, Nairobi, we're equipping young people with these tools as infrastructure, digital infrastructure, to collect data about the environment, to use that to shape the ways that they engage with decision makers, and to use that to be part of shaping their cities and the future of their cities. So for example, the young people in Lagos collected data before the marathon. They were running the marathon in Lagos, collected data on walkability risk, air pollution risk, heat, etc. And on marathon day when the roads were closed. They found on a marathon day the air pollution was 60% lower. They then used that to engage with their state government to say, these are the experiences we found of walking in public space. This is how much more pleasant it was. Let's be part of shaping, because we also notice you have a non-motorized transport policy that doesn't seem to be implemented yet. Let us be part of shaping that. And then they ended up signing an MOU with the government, and they are now part of shaping that. The same thing has happened in Nairobi around the clean air policy. And so the point is, this is only possible because of the infrastructure, the digital, the intellectual, the social infrastructure that's been laid down to allow them to be part of shaping this. This is my last slide, which is that the future we want will be determined by whether we have and we invest in the infrastructure and the institutions that allow us to thrive in this liminal space, that allow us to dare to believe in the power of cities as spaces that generate health, not just risk to be managed. Allow us to believe in the wisdom of young people to reimagine futures, because this is the time to do that. And really critically allow us to invest in the infrastructure of hope as the foundation for transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tallulah Oni. And now we're going to have a panel discussion. So I'd like to actually invite Tallulah back on stage, and with James Robinson and with Montek Singh Agualia. Big round of applause. Okay. And we're going to be discussing the mega trends that shape the world in the next few decades. Please have any of these three. I'm sitting. Great, thank you so much. Thank you both for your talks, and thank you for joining us. So Montek Singh Ahluwalia, you are a legend, a giant in economics in India, distinguished fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Progress in New Delhi, senior positions at the World Bank and IMF, and you served as deputy chairman of the Planning Commission of India, which was a cabinet minister position, and you're an architect of this phenomenal reform and economic development in India between 2007 and 2017 period. So I'm going to start with you. Now, have you got any reflections on the talks that Tallulah and James have just given? And do you see a new development model emerging?
Well, you said, do I have any initial reflections? I just want to thank both of them for really very thought-provoking presentations. I think they touched on some very, very important points. We won't go into that, the audience has heard them. You know, whether I see a development model emerging, that's a completely different story. And to my mind, it's not that simple. I mean, neither of the lecturers or the presenters was simply saying that here's a model. They were really saying, look, the world's a lot more complex than you guys thought. And if you recognize the nature of that complexity, you'd think a little bit harder on how to solve the problems. But you know, I feel that merely emphasizing the complexity doesn't really help. I mean, you want to, for example, there was, Tallulah, I think, talked about hope. Well, clearly, I mean, if you don't have hope, you're dead. There's nothing else to do. But you know, hope alone doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it can worsen it. I mean, all the MAGA guys in the United States have hope. They hope that they're going to create a completely new society. But they're comprehensively wrong. They're not basing their hope on any recognized scientific knowledge. So how do you ensure that the public debate doesn't confuse hope with realizable and internally consistent objectives? That's tough. And I think, you know, I could, Professor Robinson rightly, pointed out the kind of move from the old liberal notion that, you know, it's a one-way street, be like us, we've done well, etc., and so on. But you know, if you look at just the history of economics, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that there's no assumption that progress is going to be smooth. In fact, if you go back to Schumpeter, creative destruction is a very important part of progress. So, in any given economic or political situation, what is the scope for gradual progress, kind of touching on what's possible, moving the thing broadly in the right direction? And what is the situation where, unless there's creative destruction, you're really not going to have any hope of moving? And I think in practical terms, you need to distinguish those.
Okay, and so Tallulah, just then responding on that, so how do we connect that hope to the scientific evidence and economic incentives and all of this infrastructure?
Yes, so I think the reason I spent so much time on that, on infrastructure of hope, is that I'd like us to reclaim, and this is why I grounded it in scholarly thought as opposed to colloquial use of hope. And I wanted to make that distinction, and maybe I didn't make that clear enough. Because as you said, yes, if hope is not grounded, then it's not practicing hope as a method and as a mandate as I'm talking about. It is, we often use it in very flippantly, but actually the ways that we use it is inaccurate for using as a method, right? So the reason why I deconstructed it to say, well, if it isn't, for a start, if it isn't connected to building agency, building capacities, building the pathways to shape and to model that's grounded in evidence, then you're not cultivating hope. It's just wishful thinking. And I want to make that distinction between hope and wishful thinking, because often it is wishful thinking. And that is not the same as hope. And if it's not an action verb, if it's not an action word, and if it cannot be grounded in approaches that have different ways of knowing. So the reason why I have the know, be, do, doing is that it has to be grounded in knowledge, right? It has to be grounded in the kind of evidence that we are on what is needed to achieve that future. If it's not grounded in knowledge, then it's not hope. It's wishful thinking, it's dreaming. If it's not grounded if they're not actionable pathways, if we say we want young people to be hopeful, but there are no actionable pathways for them to shape the future, then it's not hope. It can be destructive in that sense, because it leads to the opposite of hope. It leads to this despondence and this hopelessness, because you're encouraging people to be hopeful, quote unquote, but you're actually just saying be optimistic, but we're not going to make space for you.
Yeah.
And so in the thinking about economic development and thinking about, I work a lot with young people, and I work a lot on cities across the continent of Africa, where the median age is 19, and 75% of people are under 30, right? Under 35. We cannot say in that context, young people be hopeful, if there are no meaningful pathways for them to shape decisions in their cities, if the work that is happening in shaping cities is not grounded in evidence, if we're not actually cultivating the skills, the capacities, the mindsets that allow them to meaningfully contribute to that development. And that is what I mean by hope.
Okay, and let's pick this up as well then, James, on, so Montek makes the point that MAGA supporters also have hope, and, but this...
But not my hope.
But in a different kind of way. Can we explore a little bit more this idea of this great inequality in the US and how that is destabilizing, and what does this mean?
Can I just say something about evidence? Knowledge is not some objective thing floating outside society either. You might have noticed in the United States at the moment, there's an enormous rejection of technical expertise why is that? Because that's seen to be part of this project, this liberal project of we know what we're talking about, you don't know what you're talking about, so I'm going to tell you what you should do. So I think, this idea of, yes, we need to make hope conditional on a kind of understanding of the scientific wisdom, absolutely, but that's not a simple problem to solve, because it's got wrapped up with a rejection of a kind of ideological model also. So how do you convey that information when, you know, science is being rejected in many domains, not just in economics, but in medicine, in everywhere you see that, in the United States at least. So I just wanted to make that comment, you know, that this is not a straightforward thing either.
And how robust are those institutions, do you see?
Well, I don't know. You know, I think the institutions, you know, like institutions are always being challenged. I think that, you know, the problem in the United States is that it's a failure of institutions. It's a failure of inclusion. You know, shared growth has sort of disappeared. You know, this enormous rise in inequality. That is a failure of institutions to adapt, I think, to adapt to globalization, to adapt to technical change, to adapt to changes in labor markets, you know. So institutions have to, I don't think this is an issue of sort of defending come hell or high water the institutions we have from attack. No, the institutions have to change, like democratic institutions have to change. People that just have no trust in democratic institutions in huge parts of the world. That's a wake-up call to reboot institutions and change institutions and find ways to make them more accountable, more democratic. So I think that's the question we should be asking. How do we make institutions work better rather than just, you know, how fragile are they?
Okay, and we're going to go to questions to the audience in a minute or two. So, and I'm going to ask Montek a question, but have some questions prepared, and the microphones will come round. But Montek, just what do you think is the hardest economic reality here in India today that India needs to deal with?
Well, clearly, I think the points that Tallulah mentioned, that, you know, bringing climate change, its reality, its devastating seriousness into people's consciousness is extremely important. I mean, I'm glad that you had this wonderful experience of Bangalore. Too bad we're not meeting in New Delhi. You would have taken 2 steps out and then stepped right back into the hotel. So, you know, I think people are kind of aware of it. But part of the problem is that when you look at these Sankey diagrams that Tallulah put up, I mean, it's the essence of a complex system that a hell of a lot of things have to move together and change together. And, you know, the essence of, I think, both economics and also policy generally is to oversimplify. I mean, policymakers like simple relationships. You know, I mean, Alan Greenspan became a hero because of the general assumption that, you know, don't let the money supply get out of control, and then you'll have a whole decade of prosperity. Now, mind you, he always qualified what he said. I mean, the famous remark, I think he made to Congress, where he said that if most of you agree with what I've said, it's because you haven't listened carefully enough. So, you know, a really good technocrat puts in all the conditions. But whatever it is, it's the simple things that don't work. But at the same time, it's very difficult in politics to win an election on the grounds that you're going to adopt a system-wide approach and make a large number of changes, most of which the audience isn't actually aware of, and somehow they're going to get behind you. And the fact is, in a democratic system, you've got to get voted back to office if you want to do anything. How to do that is, it varies from society to society, but we must actually understand that it's not a lack of understanding of the complexity, it's a failure on our part to define how to make progress. And when you say making progress, some of that progress departs from complexity. I mean, at any given time, there are hundreds of things you need to do, but 3 or 4 of them are maybe really crucial. How do you get traction behind, look, we'll sort all the other stuff out, but let's sort these things out now?
Yes, absolutely. Now, we're going to go to some questions then from the audience. And let's see, if you put your hands up, we'll try to see you. We'll get a microphone to you. I see 3 questions there. If we take 2, there's a person in the red there and a person in the light shirt. If we could take 2 at a time, that would be great.
This question is to any of you on the panel, and Montek, with your understanding of India, of course. You said that hope should be grounded in scientific knowledge, and hope that departs from scientific knowledge has little hope of succeeding. Now, my question to you is, there is a growing voice that all the work which has been done based on the scientific knowledge that exists so far has led to extreme inequality in many countries. So when you say it should be based on existing knowledge, what is the change that should be made in the future to ensure that such inequality does not persist?
Okay, can we take the question there on next as well, and we'll do both at the same time.
We know that the world 20, 30 years from now will be ours, like our generations. But there is this feeling that I find with people of my age, that there's this inertia against doing anything meaningful, in the sense that we're not really organizing, like the movements that you've done in cities of Africa. I don't think there's going to be that much, let's say, excitement about doing those things in cities in India, because the bureaucratic systems that we have in place are not very inclusive and listen to our voices. So how do we make our institutions adapt to that? Like, we know that the growing voice of the youth is very important, and there are a lot of problems that we are facing as societally, economically. But the feeling that we get is that the bureaucratic systems or the politicians never.
That's great. I think we got the idea there. So, would you? Who would like to take these? I think maybe.
I'll just a couple of thoughts on that. I'd like to firstly qualify by saying, when I talk about institutions, I don't just mean political institutions. Our academic institutions need to change. Our academic institutions don't sufficiently cultivate hope, as I mentioned it, right? So it's our academic institutions, it's our civil society institutions, it's our political institutions, it's across the board, right? You're thinking about, that's the first thing. The second thing, when I talk about knowledge, part of the reason I set up Urban Better as an institute that works with and not necessarily entirely part of the university I work, is that the knowledge comes from different sources, right? There is scientific knowledge, but we also have to think about democratizing the process of knowledge creation. And so the research that I do, for example, that we do in my group, it comes from the ground, because we recognize that people are experts with it. You know, there's a term I heard someone say, community professors. People are experts in their own environments. So how do we connect that knowledge generation and give them the tools to be able to generate evidence that works in tandem with and not separate from academic institutions is one thing. And that's one of the ways I'm talking about when I think about institutions that need to adapt. And then and maybe the second one I'll leave to you, because the second point makes exactly the point that I wanted to make. Because, by the way, before we started in Lagos, in Accra, young people would say exactly the same thing. So that the terrain is not any different. The key thing is finding spaces within. So we work entirely subnationally, because we find that city and state governments, there's a bureaucracy, but there's always people in there that understand that when you work with young people, you can actually get your job done better. So the trick is finding those people and starting there. It doesn't always mean starting at the bureaucratic level. And so what we do is kind of create that infrastructure that allows that space and grows that space for those pathways to come into being, and to enable and accelerate the ways that young people can then be part of shaping. But these cities I gave example of are not any different. Okay. It's just, you just have to start somewhere.
Okay, and then Montek, in one sentence, maybe, how can Indian institutions allow young people to flourish? How young people can claim space in these fora?
Yeah, let me just comment on the two things that were raised. One was inequality. I think that is a serious problem all around the world. It is a problem in India also. But I mean, you know, it's not unknown what to do with inequality. We just have to read Piketty himself. I mean, Piketty says that, look, you may have inequality before taxation, but you can have greater equality after taxation if you have the right kind of taxes. But I mean, the fact is, in India, we revel in giving tax exemptions. I mean, you know, India has, finance minister after finance minister in successive governments. This is not a political party position. They love to get up and say, and now I'm raising the minimum level free of income tax from A to B. And as a result, the level at which tax is levied in India as a ratio of its per capita income is higher than in any other country. Now, if you're all that concerned about inequality, students should be asking this question when they meet MPs. That is, what is your view on this? And there are a whole lot of other things you can do on the tax front. That's one thing. The second, on bureaucracy, that is really an Indian curse. And quite frankly, that's where creative destruction comes in. And coming back to cities, we do not have a system in which our cities have effective governance at all. It's a highly concentrated system where if you're the mayor of a city, you're simply not an important person. You know, let me illustrate this by an example. Many years ago, I happened to be part of the delegation that Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi took, I think it was 1989, to China, or late 88. And I was in the plane and we were landing in Shanghai, and we were looking at the program, and the program said lunch given to the Prime Minister by the mayor of Shanghai. Okay? And I said, what is this? This is very low level. He said, no, he's going to be the future Prime Minister. I mean, in China, somebody who's a mayor, Shanghai is almost as important as a province. I mean, it was even in the late 80s. Whoever runs Shanghai really runs Shanghai. The mayor of Bombay runs nothing. I mean, just, you know, and the truth of the matter is, citizens of Bombay, and I guess the same thing is true of Bengaluru also, do not have a system where they are voting for someone who's going to run Bangalore politically in a sensible way. And I think this is a huge problem, and it cannot be solved unless you actually change the constitutional responsibility for the division of power. That's a big task, but that's what we should concentrate on.
Okay, so now our time is up on this panel. I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Tallulah Oni, and James Robinson. A big round of applause, please. Thank you. Now, yeah. We have.
We had planned a brain break after this first session, but this session has been so much of an aerobics for the brains that we're going to jump straight into the second session. So while economics and mathematics and institutions share human progress, science gives us the courage to dream and make it a reality. For our next session, I'm delighted to welcome on stage a man who leads an institution seeded by the trusts and also a cornerstone of nurturing some of the brightest scientific minds in the country. Please put your hands together for Professor Jairam Chengalur, Director, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Shilpi. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as Shilpi said, I think this has been a brain-energizing session, and so we don't really need a break. I think we're all fired to move on. And to keep the momentum going, I'd like to now invite Professor David MacMillan to speak to us. I know you'll waiting to hear from Professor MacMillan, so I'll keep my introduction short. Professor David MacMillan was born and brought up in Scotland, but moved to the US to do a PhD, and after that to a very, very distinguished career in chemistry in the US. He is currently the James McDonald Distinguished University Professor of Chemistry at Princeton University, and also, of course, as we all know, he won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2021. We heard a short while earlier about hope and about how agency is a very important part of hope. So I thought I should sort of mention also that Professor MacMillan devoted maybe all of his component of the Nobel Prize to set up an endowment for the education of financially sort of strained students in Scotland, and therefore to give them agency.
Okay, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. First and foremost, it's absolutely fantastic to be here. I've never been to India before. This is my first time in India. I've only been here for 2.5 days, and it's been mind-blowing. It really has. So thank you for the chance to be here. Now that I've been very nice to you, I'll talk about chemistry. One of the things I learned from basically James's talk at the beginning is that you shouldn't listen to Scottish people. So you can decide what you want to do with this presentation. That's up to you. But the one thing I am going to tell you about is what is the future in science. And one of the biggest futures in science is actually catalysis. Catalysis is absolutely massive, and I'm going to try and explain to you some of the reasons why that is, but I'm also going to talk to you about the origins of a scientific breakthrough in catalysis, which came from my lab. So I'm going to use that as a template to talk about the future. Okay, now you might be wondering, what is catalysis? So I want all of you to sort of look around this room, and one of the first things I'll tell you is absolutely everything you can see right now was made by chemistry. It involved a chemical reaction. Every single thing you can see was made by a chemical reaction. This is my office in Princeton, and if you look around my office, basically everything you can see right here was made by chemical reactions. If I focus on one thing, that's my coffee cup right there. There's coffee cup, and this is in fact the chemical reaction to make caffeine, the key constituent that you would find in coffee. Now, chemical reactions typically require energy. They're not spontaneous most of the time. And the way that chemists sort of demonstrate this is an energy diagram. Now, don't worry, this is not going to get too technical. But the way that I explain energy diagrams to high school students is the following, is basically imagine that every day you were going home, you would have to walk over a pretty large hill every single day. That would require a lot of energy every single day, and it would become cumbersome. It would be annoying because you have to walk over a very large hill. But imagine you could build a tunnel that goes through that hill to get home every day. That would be a wonderful thing, and that's exactly what catalysis does. So catalysis makes existing chemical reactions easier and faster. But more importantly, and if you learn one thing from my talk today, it takes chemical reactions that were impossible and makes them possible. That's what catalysis does. Okay, now many people have their favorite catalytic reactions. I'm going to show you mine. And this is actually the global population of the world over 2,000 years. It's basically flat. And then at the beginning of the 20th century, there's an inflection, and we've now grown to be 8 billion people on this earth. Now, as it happens, you couldn't have 8 billion people on our Earth right now if it wasn't for this one catalytic reaction, the conversion of nitrogen over to ammonia. It's an incredibly important catalytic reaction. In fact, it uses 1% of the world's energy supply every single day. That's how important it is. Now, why do we need this chemical reaction, this catalytic process to do this? Well, we need it to grow crops. We need it to have enough food to allow 8 billion people to actually be on Earth at the present time. And in fact, this is one of my favorite little factoids about this. If you think about your body right now, and you think about all the protein and the DNA and all the nitrogen atoms that are in your body right now, 50% of those nitrogen atoms in your body come from a factory in Germany. If that doesn't freak you out, nothing will, okay? That's an incredible statistic. In fact, so I want to try and also point out that 90% of the world's chemical reactions on an industrial scale use catalysis, and 35% of the global GDP at the present time is based upon catalysis. And that number is only going to increase as we tackle climate change and sustainability. Okay, so that's catalysis. Why am I interested in catalysis? Well, my part of this story comes in where in 2021, along with Ben List, we won the Nobel Prize for a thing called organocatalysis. So you might be wondering, organocatalysis, what does that mean? So I just told you what catalysis means, so I'm now going to try and tell you what organo means. And to tell you what organo is, I have to take you back to 1998, and I'll explain why in a few moments, but what were the areas of catalysis in 1998? So there was two. There's the way that your body does catalysis, which is uses enzymes, which is something that's called biocatalysis, and then there's the most predominant way on the earth that we do catalysis, which is to actually use metals. This was developed by human beings in labs to do chemistry, and it's absolutely everywhere. Now, the problem is there's many, many issues with using metals to do catalysis. And I can explain this to you in the following way. This is a typical metal catalyst, and even if you're not a chemist, you can see that you can break that down basically into two parts, the left-hand side, the right-hand side. The right-hand side are the metals. Now, many metals are expensive, they're toxic, and they're often non-sustainable. If you think about palladium, which is in your iPhones, or palladium, which are in your car, we only have enough palladium on Earth to last about another 90 years. Then it'll be completely gone, completely not sustainable. So we have a major problem in terms of using metals to do catalysis. Now, the left-hand part of this catalyst, this is the organic molecule, and typically it was just used to hold the metal in place so that it could do the chemistry. But organic molecules are inexpensive, they're safe, they're sustainable, and they're completely, I mean, if you think about human beings, we're made of organic molecules, and we go right back into the life cycle. When we pass on, we go right back into the life cycle. So we are completely sustainable as organic molecules. So the question became, and one of the things we started to think about, what if we use only the organic part as the catalyst? And eventually this became known as organocatalysis. Okay, but why 1998? Well, in 1998, I got a job as an assistant professor, and this was in Berkeley, over in California. I got this job, it was my first job, and this is a photograph of my very first group in our very first year. This is 10:10 on a Friday night. We're in lab, this young group, trying hard, really trying to have an impact, really trying to make a difference. And what were we going to do? Well, I decided I wanted to try and do this thing called organocatalysis. Why was I wanting to do this? Well, I was convinced at the time that all of these organic molecules are broadly available from nature. The second thing is, much like a human body, we're not sensitive to water or air. Because it's so abundant, it's incredibly inexpensive. You don't need any special instrumentation or contraptions to use organic molecules. They exist happily out in our environment, and they're non-toxic and they're completely sustainable. So this is what I wanted to do. The problem was I had absolutely no idea how to do it. I had no good ideas whatsoever. But one day in lab, Tristan Lambert, who was a first-year graduate student in my group, a young co-worker, he came to me and said, what is the mechanism of reductive amination? Now, Tristan is now a very successful chemist in his own right. He's now the chairman of the Cornell chemistry department. But being a young student and being a young professor, I wanted to run to the board and teach him this mechanism, which is what I did. And I said, if you take an aldehyde and an amine, it reversibly forms an aminiamine, and when it forms this species, it has the suitable electronics to do the subsequent chemistry. And it was right there, right then, I had what I would call the quintessential eureka moment, because I thought, wait a minute, if you look at this amine with an alpha-beta unsaturated aldehyde, if that forms an aminiamine, that looks like a lot like a field of metal catalysis, which has been known for many, many decades. So to show this in a more conventional format, in this top equation, this is a form of metal catalysis which has been used for hundreds of reactions. And the lower equation here, if we replace the metal with an organic molecule, there's basically no examples of being able to do that. But if it was successful, if these were basically simultaneous equations, that means that organic molecules should be able to catalyze literally hundreds of reactions. Okay, so we went off to test it, and this is the very first time we tested it in the notebook of Kateria Rent. We took these two molecules, and that's the product we wanted to generate, and instead of having a metal over as a catalyst, we're now going to have an organic molecule. And when we performed this reaction, it worked. It worked the first time, which was incredibly exciting. And I always remember when I got this result, going into my office, closing the door, closing the blinds, and then jumping up and down for 5 minutes. I was so excited that we got this result. But the next part was we had to publish our first paper. In our first paper, we had to sort of come up with a new name for this completely new area. So the name we came up with was organocatalysis. And you might say to yourself, well, what's in a name? Is naming things important? And it turns out naming things is incredibly important. This is Johann Jacob Berzelius, very famous scientist from Sweden, who in the 1800s, he came up with vocabulary for science of things like catalysis, proteins, polymers, isomers, organic, inorganic. And the importance of names has carried forward into the modern era. Things like directed evolution, AI, nanotechnology, organocatalysis, they provide a framework in which scientists can discuss these very large areas of science. So that was the name. The second thing we introduced in this paper was the concept of what's called a generic activation mode. That sounds a very fancy way of basically saying this idea shouldn't work just for one chemical reaction. It should work for hundreds of chemical reactions. So the problem was, I said that in this paper, but we hadn't actually tested that. I was just being very bold in saying this. So I went off to test it, and basically what I found was this was the original reaction, but then we started to look at other reactions, and it went bang, bang, and it stopped. It stopped after 3 reactions. So at this moment, I started to have a panic attack, right? Because I've told the world, this is going to work for hundreds of reactions, and it's only working for 3. That's very disappointing. But fortunately, I had 2 amazing young graduate students, Joel Austin and Chris Bortz, who had this very bold prediction that if you take this catalyst and you remove one of the methyl groups and you change it into 4 other carbons over here, they predicted this would now work broadly for hundreds of reactions. Now, to try and demonstrate to a non-chemistry audience how bold this prediction is, I always try to use this analogy. Okay. So this is Zlatan Ibrahimovic. He's a very famous Swedish football player. He's a football god, and he would do incredibly cool things. He was very bold in the things he would do. So I'll show you one bold thing that he did, which is this goal where he does this overhead kick, bang, from there, boom, what an amazing goal. Okay, so I actually showed this video in my Nobel lecture, and a lot of newspapers in London, especially the Times of London, got very angry. And they actually said, Macmillan is Scottish, and the only reason why he showed this goal was because it was scored against England. Now, I think that's a little bit unfair, but let's watch it one more time. All right, so, dang, what a goal. Fantastic, all right. All right, so here's the question. Can we do something this bold and have this beautiful outcome? So we went from this catalyst, and then we changed it to this one, and it took off like gangbusters. Other people started jumping in, other people such as Jorgensen and Hayashi, many other people started developing catalysts, and now there's hundreds, now thousands of chemical reactions which use organocatalysis. So one of the questions that people often ask me are, what are the applications? What can you actually use this for? And there's a whole range of different ones, but I thought I'd just show you 2. The first one is for flavors and fragrances, for perfume, for smells. One of the things I've loved about being in India is the smells are incredible. And as you know, smells are important to the world. And in fact, perfume is used in an enormous amount on a daily basis. And Firmenich were actually able to take a chemical process where they can now make lily of the valley in 1 chemical step instead of 6 chemical steps, which is a huge reduction in the amount of energy to make this one perfume. But without question, the number one application of organocatalysis has been for medicine and for making medicine. And there's many, many examples of this. I was at Merck last week. They showed me a new cancer treatment they're using or building using organocatalysis. But this is another one from Merck. It's a migraine treatment called Talsegipant. And they're actually able to make this medicine very inexpensively because they're using organocatalysis. Now, there's a third advantage of organocatalysis, and this really goes back to this idea of talking about institutions. And this is the idea of, which now became known as democratizing catalysis. What does that mean? Well, organocatalysis is so affordable, and it's so inexpensive, it's incredibly accessible, meaning it's not only taught on every continent in the world, it's now there's research performed in every continent in the world. And so people often ask me, where is the next big idea going to come from within organocatalysis? And I always say, I actually don't know. But I know it's not going to be based on who has the most money or who has the most resources. It's going to be based on who's the best idea. And that's something which for me is incredibly, incredibly important. Now, in terms of India, so organocatalysis is huge in India. In an academic sense, it's performed in almost every department here. There's just tremendous work that's performed in organocatalysis. But also industrially, here in Bengaluru, companies like Syngene, Anthem, Jubilant, all now use organocatalysis. But it's India-wide. You go to Kolkata, you go to Hyderabad, and there's many other companies which are already using organocatalysis, which has been fantastic to see the adoption of it here too. But I want to finish off by talking about what is the future. And this is just really quickly, we have to think about catalysis for the future. We have to care about 8 billion people and how we're actually going to go forward. And one of the things I'll tell you right now is that there are ways to do sustainable catalysis. Organocatalysis, biocatalysis, photocatalysis, electrocatalysis. If we were going to serve the needs of this increasing population of our world, we're going to actually have to come up with new types of catalysis. Now, I'll finish off very quickly by making this one point. I'm going to tell you right now, with respect to climate change, we are one catalytic reaction away from solving climate change. That's absolutely true. So, by a show of hands, I want to ask you the following question. How many people here have thought about climate change and think climate change is a problem? Could you put your hands up? Okay, I think that's basically everyone in the audience. How many people here know that we're one catalytic reaction away from solving climate change? No one. So that's a communications problem. And we want to talk about hope. You want to talk about ways in which for the future we can drive people's confidence or ambition. We have to do a better job of explaining to the world how important these types of scientific areas really are, because we really are that close. Okay, with that, I will finish off, and I'll just say thank you so much for your attention.
Professor MacMillan. And as you'd remember, when he started his talk, he told us that a chemical reaction can be thought of as pushing, I guess, in some sense, the molecule over the hill and trying to get to, some beautiful place on the other side. And our next speaker works in public health, which I think, to me has always been a little bit of a Sisyphean task, where I imagine people perpetually trying, to push this boulder up the hill. But I think Dr. Kang has shown us that, if you actually put in enough effort, if you have the optimism and the hope for it, you can actually get over to the other side, and you can actually get to these beautiful green valleys on the other side. Dr. Kang has had a very distinguished career at the Christian Medical College. She was also a pioneer in getting vaccines qualified in India, particularly the rotavirus vaccine. And many of you may be familiar with her because she played a very important role in public health communication during the COVID-19 crisis. She's currently with the Gates Foundation, and without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Kang to speak to us.
Thank you, Jairam, for the introduction. And you expect me to follow David MacMillan? Oh, come on. So I am going to start with a poll. I've done this before. How many people in this audience have never had diarrhea? Anybody? One person? 2 people? 3 people? Okay, that's not bad. It just means that your mother never told you about the times that you were trouble. So when I was born, about 8.5 million people used to die of diarrhea every year. Of those 8.5 million, 6 million were children under the age of 5. If we compare the figures for last year, the numbers had come down to approximately 1 million, and about half of those were children under 5. So there has been improvement over these 60 years. Now, if I ask you about causes of diarrhea, you're going to tell me that water, sanitation, food safety, and hygiene will fix it all. And I will tell you that you're wrong, because that does work really well for bacteria and for parasites, not so well for viruses. But to tell you this story of what we've done in global health over the past 60 years, I'd like to take you back to 1971. In 1971, India was helping East Pakistan become an independent country. During that time, the war itself was really short, but before the war actually started, a lot of people started to come across from what was then East Pakistan to West Bengal. People flooded into Calcutta, and then when Calcutta started to crumble, they set up refugee camps all along the border. The border is about 4,000 kilometers, and there were over 1,000 refugee camps. If you think back to 1971, it will be obvious that those refugee camps did not have a lot to offer. So if you think about tents and toilets, how do you think it was possible to provide that for the 9.9 million people that were estimated to have crossed during that time? Layer on top of that, the monsoon, and you create the perfect circumstances for outbreaks of cholera. And these are pictures from that. We did know about what treatment worked for cholera. There was work that had been done in Calcutta and in Dhaka in the 1960s, and we knew that if you gave intravenous rehydration to patients, they would survive. But giving intravenous rehydration in a field is no simple task, and there just weren't the number of people that we needed who were able to actually deliver this life-saving treatment in those camps. In fact, when cholera broke out, the mortality rate was 40%. 4 out of 10 people who got cholera actually died of it. But there were 2 discoveries that changed the game during that time. And what it required was science and understanding of gut physiology and of enteric infections, and the ability to take risk. The first part of the science came from S.N. Dey working in Calcutta. He showed that unlike what had been proposed in Germany when Vibrio cholerae was identified as the cause of cholera, it was believed that cholera actually resulted in a sloughing of the gut intestine. Essentially, the rice water stools that you saw in cholera were supposed to be all the cells lining the gut coming out. What they showed was that actually gut architecture was not altered. The cause of cholera was a toxin that was made by the Vibrio cholerae. The bacteria never got into the epithelial cell. The toxin bound to a receptor on the surface, and that was able to result in the secretion first of chloride, but then of sodium and water through a paracellular pathway. Now we knew that, and in the 1960s, some studies began to be done in experimental models to see if we could come up with a way of replacing that fluid through an oral route. This required the recognition that in order for sodium to be absorbed in the intestine, you also had to give glucose because the transporter carried both sodium and glucose together. So the person who took the risk of taking what was essentially a small-scale finding and converting it into a treatment was David MacMillan, who was working in the refugee camps of Bengaluru, and he taught nurses how to mix salt and sugar together in water in the right proportions, and this was used to treat the refugees. This resulted in a decrease in mortality from 40% to 3%. There was a 70% reduction in the use of intravenous rehydration, but without the risk that David MacMillan took, we would never have gotten this kind of large-scale in-field study. It took until 1974 for WHO to recommend oral rehydration therapy, and it's been estimated recently that about 70 million lives have been saved so far because of oral rehydration solution. Now I'm going to move from what causes acute watery diarrhea is the cause of an ongoing pandemic, cholera, to a disease that affects children, and this is rotavirus, which is a cause of diarrhea in very young children of many species, including humans. Now, this virus was described as a cause of diarrhea in 1973, and vaccines started to be experimented on pretty early. We started in the late 1970s, and in 1998, we had a vaccine, which started to be used first in the US. If I show you this map of diarrheal disease, these are deaths due to diarrhea. Where do you think the vaccine should be used? Blue is very few deaths. You don't expect children to die of diarrhea in the US. Where should this vaccine have gone first? It should have gone to Africa, it should have come to Asia. It wound up in the US. And that was because rotavirus is a democratic virus. It affects children in rich countries and in poor countries. Unfortunately, though this great scientific breakthrough had been made, one of the problems was that, like many other vaccines discovered in the West, it was very difficult to think about bringing it to India. It cost $200 to immunize one child. But in India, we knew that we needed the vaccine because we had done surveillance studies to identify how much diarrhea there was in India due to rotavirus. It was 40% of all diarrheal hospitalizations in children under 5. And we needed somebody who would take the risk and make a vaccine in India, a country that had never done a phase 3 trial before. The person who took that risk was Dr. Raj Bhan, then the secretary of the Department of Biotechnology, who had found a unique strain of rotavirus in the neonatal wards at AIIMS, and then had characterized it in his laboratory and partnered with the US National Institutes of Health, and other organizations, including companies, to make this vaccine. It was no easy task. India had never done a phase 3 vaccine trial looking at efficacy ever before. So it was a challenge for us to do, but we came together as scientists, as bureaucrats, as administrators, as industry, and we did the first phase 3 efficacy trial in the country. This resulted in a vaccine that now costs 50 cents a dose. So you can immunize a child for $1.50 for 3 doses. This vaccine was introduced in India in 2016 and is now being used in many parts of the world. The map that you see there in green shows all the countries that have now introduced the vaccine. And what I'd like to show you is what a difference scaling in India makes. If you look at the graph that is on the bottom right-hand corner, left-hand only graph on the slide, the blue is the cost of the vaccine with a multinational company, and the yellow and the green are the Indian companies. Not only did we drop the price for ourselves, we also dropped it for the world. In 2023, 3/4 of the poorest countries in the world received rotavirus vaccines that had been made in India. So we had people who took risk, people who brought institutions together, and this is what that vaccine change really meant. Until 2010, India used to make vaccines, but we made vaccines that had been made in other parts of the world and for a pretty narrow spectrum of the entire development process of making vaccines. But with the rotavirus vaccine made in India, we went from preclinical studies all the way into phase 4, showing the effectiveness of the vaccines as they were used in India. What did this mean for our vaccine industry? Well, we had this little blip in 2020 to 2022. India was able to make a vaccine on every platform that exists. India was the only country that had a DNA vaccine, an mRNA vaccine, an inactivated vaccine, a vaccine as VLP, a vaccine that was a subunit component, and an adenovirus vectored vaccine. We conducted 2 phase 3 clinical trials. Overall, if you take all the numbers of people who participated in vaccine studies in India, it adds up to as much as in any other country in the world. That meant India imported no vaccines. We had an immunization program that delivered 2.2 billion doses of vaccines. So this is what building on innovation in our country can do. And if I think about the future and what we would want out of it, can you think about a world where if you breathe into a mask, it will tell you whether you have tuberculosis, pneumonia, or any other infectious disease? Could you get an ECG today that will predict your risk of a heart attack 5 years or 10 years from now? Those things are nearly possible today. So what I will leave you with is that's the ambitions that we have today to be able to solve problems for the world. What will your ambitions be for the generation that is growing up in science in India today? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kang, for that extraordinarily inspiring talk. And so now we'll move on to a panel discussion. I'd like to invite Dr. Kang to please be seated, Professor MacMillan. And I'd also like to invite Kush Parmar onto the stage. Kush Parmar is a managing partner at 5AM Ventures, which is a leading investment firm focused on funding and building the next generation life science companies. He's also got a very strong connection to Bangalore. He's a board member and co-founder of Immunil Therapies, which is based here in Bangalore, and is pioneering both cell and gene therapies in the country at very modest cost. So welcome, all three of you. So I'd like to start by, connecting to some themes which we heard about earlier, about things not being a one-way street, about the interconnectedness of things, about urban infrastructure being health infrastructure, and so on. So I wanted to pick on one particular interconnectedness, and that is between public health and pharma, which could be in multiple ways. That, if you look at the kind of challenges that we will face going forward, which will come from, challenges we know will come up in large numbers due to nutrition, diet, and so on. We can see that we are going to need certain therapies going forward. But also there are issues of feedback where, for example, in tuberculosis, we can see that we are getting a large population which is drug resistant, and this is entirely to do with public health. So what do you think we could do going forward to address these kind of interconnectedness in a more sort of coherent way?
So I think the Sankey diagram kind of goes in the right direction of showing us how complex control really is. It is easy for policymakers to simplify tools, and that's what they would aim for. But I think for us to be able to really make a difference, we have to make them aware of connectedness and complexity. Because without that, you will have only partial successes.
Okay.
May I add?
Yeah.
I think we should be asking the question, for India to be a leading country, why should India wait, outside of this vaccine, rotavirus vaccine example, in general, 10 years before a new medicine is developed somewhere else, before it can be made accessible for India and for other parts of the world? That seems to be unacceptable. And the country has done a tremendous job building on its talent and expertise in chemistry, in manufacturing, industriousness, to build a huge generics industry that's been very, very productive for the country and for the world. But it is time, as we just witnessed in the presentation about the vaccine and the kind of impact it can have for India and for the world's problems, because not where these medicines are invented are not necessarily thinking about the problems India wants to solve and the rest of the world wants to solve. And in order to build the infrastructure and the capabilities to take on those kinds of problems that are unique, not just here, but in other parts of the world, it needs to be going to an innovation-driven regime, and that is immensely awaiting here in India. We've had sporadic examples, but they need to be systematic now.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I'll just follow on that theme of innovation, and clearly you're going to need to be agile to face these very interconnected problems, and both in your thinking and to be able to respond fast when you see these new viruses coming up. So maybe I could pose that question to you, Professor MacMillan, that what do you think would be the role of chemistry? It's obviously important, but what do you think the role of chemistry, particularly in the pharma sector, is going to be going forward? And what do you think in India we could do to take the lead over here?
Yeah, it's interesting. So within chemistry, we always call ourselves the central science because we feel like we're the central component to what everyone else is doing. The problem is we don't bother to tell anyone else this. It's very self-satisfying in an interesting way. But it is incredibly important, and if you think about the pharmaceutical industry, now pharma is developing many different modalities, but yet it's for the future, for the world, and especially for countries all over the world, molecules, small molecules in particular, are unbelievably important. And chemistry, for small molecules, but also for vaccines and other areas, is not just important, it's critical. It's 100% critical to whatever happens for pharmaceutical. It's always interesting for me when I talk to someone who's not a chemist and say, do you know where medicines come from? They say, yeah, they come from doctors, from MDs. And I'm like, no, they don't. They come from chemists. And they're always slightly shocked by that. But the key part, what does it mean for India? India, I think, it has built a fantastic educational system which is pushing many different areas, but one of them which has been fundamental for over 100 years here, more, even longer, has been chemistry. And you may like to hear this or you may not like to hear this, but an amazing template has been watching China and seeing what China has now developed. But you can see that India is ascending at an extraordinarily rapid rate, and it has also, though, this fantastic chemistry group here that with the right resourcing, as it continues to grow, and the chemistry PhD numbers are growing extensively, it's extremely well positioned to do what Kush is talking about, which is to build out in this innovative sense the biotech and the pharmaceutical companies for the future, for India, but also for the world.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you've talked about growth, and I think that's certainly something which we've been seeing in India. You know, the economy has been growing very fast. Mr. Sharma reminded us that we are the third largest economy, fifth, and on track to become the third. And what, what we have seen so far, I mean, the future need not repeat the past, but what we've seen so far is for economies to grow, energy consumption has to grow. And energy consumption has always been associated with pollution, with environmental degradation. You said that we are one catalytic reaction away from solving climate change. I assume you were talking about fixing carbon dioxide, but maybe you were talking about more complex ideas. But I'd just like to hear a little bit more from you about how you think chemistry could play a role in allowing, economic progress, allowing more energy to be consumed, while at the same time not degrading the environment.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really is the question. If you think about all energy on Earth, all energy on Earth really comes from solar energy. Everything, all the energy we have, all the life forms we have, all the energy comes from solar. The problem is that we have used what we would call a thermodynamic source instead of a kinetic source, which is fossil fuels. We do have catalytic reaction. You could talk about CO2 fixation. Turns out there's other ways of doing it, which involve mineralization of CO2. That's another reaction. But the key message is what we need to do is short circuit the use of going through effectively trees, organic materials, becoming fossil fuels, becoming energy, and actually short circuit it so that we can use solar energy directly. People have known this for decades and decades and decades. That is a 100% e-chemistry question and a chemistry solution. And that is where we have to be positioned, is how do you use sunlight, for example, to store energy along the way. But there's other things we can be doing too. For example, we know that you will not be able to replace fossil fuels in airplanes anytime soon. And airplanes are not going anywhere. And so we have these things. We have huge energy getting dodecane, for example, to use for fuels for airplanes, but we don't really have that much dodecane, so we have these huge energies in getting our hands on it to use in airplanes, but there's a molecule called hexane, which is incredibly available all over the Earth, and if we could just take two of them and combine them, we've solved the huge problem. But these are not things that we're really communicating, not even to the outside world, we're not even really communicating it to each other. So again, I go back to a lot of this is real chemistry problems, but we're not actually identifying the problems widely to basically leverage the enormous community of chemists who are out there who are really smart, believe it or not, chemists are smart, that will be able to effectively solve these problems. It's a problem identification.
Thank you. Yeah. And maybe, Dr. Kang, because you gave us such a fired up talk, I'd like to sort of end with you. Unfortunately, we have time only for one more. I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the next challenge that we could and should take up in India as far as public health is concerned?
To me, the biggest challenge, I'll pick two.
Okay.
In infectious diseases, because that's my background, it really is tuberculosis and what we can do about that. And the non-TB one is the rise in non-communicable diseases, particularly cardiovascular and diabetes, for which I think we should be thinking about solutions. There are some, but there is a lot more to be done.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, we could now go to the audience for questions. I'd like to, since we are talking about the future, I'd like to encourage, particularly younger members of the audience to ask questions. And, if you don't mind, not the young at heart, but the truly young in age. So maybe I would go to you in the middle over there. Sorry? That's my, yes. One more in the corner. Yeah, please, maybe we could start there and then go in the middle.
Hi, you mentioned about innovation in drug development, asking why should India wait to create their own homegrown drugs and which address Indian issues and Indian problems. So what's stopping India from doing that? What's stopping the researchers and institutions from doing that?
It's already starting, but I think we're just at the very, very beginning. It's a wonderful question. India is a country that went in 4 years from recognizing that this country did not have a very complicated cell therapy that can be transformative for cancer called CAR T medicines. It was a country that did not have that, did not have any access to that, to mobilizing efforts, including at Tata institutions in Bombay, and also here in Bengaluru as well. People like yourselves joining these efforts to mobilize them. Indians abroad returning back to India to join these efforts, and within 4 years going from that recognition of an absence to manufacturing, developing these medicines, conducting clinical trials, to having them now approved. There's now a few approved CAR T medicines, some of the most complicated, most expensive medicines in the world, here available in India, and that's just the beginning of the journey, and it's sparked many, many other efforts. I believe that that is just the beginning of a whole revolution of India transforming from being a phenomenally influential generic supplier for the world to an innovative supplier of medicines for the world, and from that lay the foundation to address problems very specific to India and to the world as well.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say that the Tata Trusts funded the two doctors who did the cancer therapy at Tata Memorial.
Absolutely, and that's why I mentioned the Tata Institution in Mumbai being one of the pioneering institutions.
Thank you. So if we could go to the gentleman in the spotted T-shirt in the middle. Sorry, it's a shirt.
It is a kurta. Never mind. Greetings. While it is true that most of us are trying to do something new to the best of our capabilities, my question is to Professor MacMillan, that is, how do we develop an intuition where we can distinguish whether what we are doing is essentially going to make a big change? How do we develop that intuition?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and a question I get a lot of the time is, how do you develop an intuition to win a Nobel Prize? It's a very difficult question to answer, actually. What do I tell everyone who leaves my group, who go, whether they go to pharma, to industry, or become an academic themselves? I have a very simple test. When you come up with an idea, do you think it's cool? And it's literally that simple. Do you think it's cool? And if you honestly, deep down inside, go, that's cool, that is really cool, it turns out you're not the only one who's going to think that. Lots and lots of other people are going to think that too. But you have to be incredibly honest with yourself. And a lot of times in science, we do things for the wrong reasons. We do it because we think we'll get a paper, or it'll be cited, or we'll get funding, or we'll do these other things. And to my mind, that's not a great way of doing science. Maybe I'm lucky I have the luxury, I don't have to think that way. But honestly, it always comes back to your own self-analysis of what do you think is cool. And if you think it's cool, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what other people think anyway, so, because you really like it. So that's my only sort of advice.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think that was a great answer. And it's also probably the first time I've heard cool and scientist used in one sentence. So maybe we could go to one more question, the gentleman in the jacket.
My question is to Dr. Kang and the financier, Kush, that you did mention that your focus would be on non-communicable diseases. You mentioned diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Won't it be smart, at least in the interim, that we focus on preventive healthcare and rather than look at cure? That is immediate, lifestyle-related issues which, got to do with urbanization, planning, and everything, and it could have a great cascading effect. I'd like to know your view about it, please.
Well, as a public health practitioner, prevention is always better than cure. The question really is, what can we bring to tools that allow us to both prevent, detect early, manage early, and not let it reach a stage where you have complications and the costs for the healthcare system are harder and more difficult to manage. So no question, a focus on prevention is really important, but prevention doesn't always work for everybody. So then we need to be thinking about solutions for care. And just, listening to all the innovators here, I think one of the things I'd like to point out to the audience is India has tremendous experience with scale, the generics question. It has tremendous experience with cost reductions, some of which is formulation and chemistry. But when it comes to innovation, we wind up having a gap between the really excellent work that is done in institutions like IISc, like TIFR, and what it takes for us to get to a point to translate those innovations. But what I have seen in the last 10 years or so is that things have changed quite dramatically. There is greater engagement from government, there's greater engagement from the private sector, there is greater engagement from the diaspora in making sure that India now charts its path for innovation in healthcare certainly, but in a lot of other fields as well. I'm kind of regretting the fact that I am the age that I am, because I'd love to be like you right now with a few more decades of science ahead of me, because I think you're going to make those changes. Yeah. And thank you in advance.
Yeah. No, I'm sure, Dr. Kang, you have many more decades of science ahead of you. Unfortunately, our time is up. I think we could have really gone on for a lot longer, but we've run out of time. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
On stage, please. And James, if you could join us, please.
And thank you all very much. We're coming to a close. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. We'd like to invite David and James back on stage for a few parting words.
Okay.
Please.
Where do I stand? You're going to tell me this time? Or do I have to make it up again?
Oh, just here's great.
It's on. Yes, so any final reflections, anything that you'd like to say particular?
I had a couple of things to say. I was very inspired by the example of organocatalysis, because, you know, working in developing countries, any sort of technological innovation that can level the playing field in that way, I find like absolutely amazing. Wow. You know, I always say the two-word version, you know, of why there are poor countries in the world is wasted talent. So anything that can allow us not to waste all that talent in Africa, I think that's absolutely fantastic. I also love this example of oral rehydration therapy and a kind of innovation in the South which just spread everywhere all over the world. But before we get too excited about all these real scientists in the room, I'd like to remind you that it was human beings that caused the famine and disaster in Bangladesh, and the war and the conflict and the violence. And that's why we need social scientists too.
And David?
Yeah, I talk about hard to follow a statement. That's a very hard statement to follow. I agree, we also need social scientists as well. No, I do love sociology, and I actually do think many people who do chemistry, physics could benefit enormously. I love reading sociology books, and I've learned so much from reading sociology books. But as a parting statement, I'm really just wanting to sort of focus on you, and literally this idea of coming to India and giving this presentation. One of the things that's been really phenomenal for me, even in the short time I've been here, but even discussing this with so many people about being here, is there's this whole idea, and this comes back to the hope part, there's this real sort of bubbling confidence and aspiration that you can feel coming to India, and it feels like this is kind of India's moment, and India knows it, and the people know it. And they're putting together all these components that is allowing this to also come through. And so for me to get the chance to come here and talk to all of you about it has been fantastic, but ultimately this is about what you're going to do. And so we hope that this is useful to you, but the rest of us is really looking forward to seeing exactly what's about to happen. So thanks very much.
On that brilliant note of hope and optimism for the future, we come to a close. But we're on stage with two laureates, and this is our moment to capture. So we are going to request Owen, who does this for a living. He's always on stage with laureates. So we will request him to do the honors and help us get all of us in a same frame with him.
Wow, this is a super pressure. So we're going to do a giant selfie, and bizarrely, I haven't done this before
we practiced
on such a
yesterday.
stage. But so at least I know which button to press, I believe. So
if
we're going to look this way,
side,
and somehow, which button is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you getting
so
the audience?
how are all of us? Right, and we're going to count you down, and we want a big cheer.
Should they stand?
Is that? No, you have to be in as well.
Thank you.
Somehow.
I want to win. You have to get
Do you want me to? Go.
Okay, and right, 3, 2, 1, cheer! Whoa! Is that?
No, you switched it off.
That is right. We need one more, guys.
Okay, let's do this.
Right, 3, 2, 1. Whoa!
Nope.
Excellent.
Oh,
Thank
you.
That sound worked. Thank you all so much. It's been lovely having you here. Thank you very, very much for being here.